Recording. Nice. Hey, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to week 6 of Advanced Programming with Java here at Portland State University. Apologize for a little bit of a late start. I was asked to join a work call right at 5:15, and so then I had to take that. It was good. It was important. So thanks for giving me some slack. Don't worry, I don't think it's going to cause us to go 15 minutes over tonight. I think we've got a lot to cover tonight, but not so much. So here's the rough agenda for tonight. We'll start out as always with Prime Minister's questions. While we didn't have a project increment due this week, we still had a bunch of stuff, and so I'm curious to hear about how it went, and I'm happy to answer any of the questions that you have about the work that was due this week, and certainly the project that is due next week. But the majority of our time tonight will be spent focusing on Project 5, which is our client-server program that uses a REST API to communicate between the client and the server. I'm just going to tell you right now, this is different. The feedback I get from my students is like, that was a really cool project, but wow, I've never done anything like that before. And so then, please pay attention tonight. Last week was kind of a breather. It gave us an opportunity to sort of catch up to where we were in the course, or maybe focus on other things. But we're right back into it tonight with some brand new and exciting stuff. So let's see here. Let's just dive into it. So Prime Minister's questions. What can I tell you? What's on your mind? You finished up the cones, made your reflections on your experience pair programming, and hopefully you're making good progress on your project 4 on the XML project. What would you like to know? Any open questions that you have? Any feedback that you have for me on the work that you've done or the work that you're doing? And feel free to come off mute and ask, or if you want to put it in chat, that works also.
So I tried to follow the link in the Project 4 PDF to look at the DTD, but I couldn't get anywhere. Am I able to open it in IntelliJ or something?
I believe you can open it in IntelliJ. Let's go see. Oh, actually, I have it right here, don't I? So yeah, just try opening up. Let's see here. Go to. Let's close that. Let's see if we can get it back. So I think if you go navigate to File and you type airline.dtd, yeah, there it is inside this Maven artifact. I think you'll be able to find it there.
Okay.
But that URL didn't work? That's possible, I suppose.
It went to the school site and then it just stopped there.
Oops. Let's see here. It's DTD, airline.dtd.
I think the link didn't have.
Oh yeah, and here again, it's very possible. Let me just go back and we signed that in week 4. Let's look at the project. Oh, I wonder if it's the tilde that's messed up. That's been known to happen before. Yep, that is the wrong tilde. Sorry. Real tilde, some sort of like fancy style. But then again, this isn't very useful. So at least looking at it in the browser, but you can certainly download it. So yep, sorry about that. But yes, you can view it in IntelliJ just by opening up the file. It actually resides in a jar file. So like when you to you why it still works, even though you can't necessarily download it. So the DTD describes the XML format, but in your XML file, like in Valid Airline, you can give it. You can say, hey, the system location, which is basically a URL, is that. And that's where it gives like a nice, well-known, a URL, a location for it. But every time you parse an XML file, you don't necessarily want to have to download that every time. And if you're, not online, if you don't have access to this website, then you're not going to be able to do it. So that's why in the let's see here, in the XML helper, I think. Yeah, in the XML helper. Oh yeah, extends this project XML helper thing. And this is where the logic for, let's see here, for resolving the entity is. And so then when the XML file is parsed, this method is called saying, hey, I'm looking for this like big old URL for this DTD. Can you tell me what it is? And this code ends up loading it as a resource. And then, sorry, I do not like all these controls. Hide floating controls, there you go, much better. Put that thing over here. And so anyway, this is the code that's actually called, that loads the, and that'll load the DTD file from, as a resource from the jar that is, that's ultimately downloaded from Maven Central. Does that make any sense at all?
Somewhat. I think it'll make more sense when I actually try it.
Okay, cool. And sorry, and London and Eric, you both posted that it doesn't work for you either. What doesn't work? The URL doesn't work? Gotcha. Thanks. Okay. Yeah, and that's why the tilde is messed up. I don't know if I can change that because I have the right tilde in the source code. Well, I'll see if I can look into that. But yeah, that is super confusing. Okay. Otherwise, how's project go? Let's see here. Project 4 going okay? Do people understand? And have you had, actually, well, I mean, I don't know, you've probably been focusing on the cones and stuff. Any other questions related to Project 4 that we can discuss here during Prime Minister's questions? Nope, not hearing anything. Okay, cool. Thanks, London. Toei asks, I saw some comments in the cones, sorry, I saw some questions in the cones comments. Do I need to answer those to get full credit? No, you don't. Basically, what I'm going to do when I grade your cones is I basically run it, and they run through all the cones that you have completed. And if you get them all, if they all pass, so all 200, whatever they are, 68 or something like that, if they all pass, great, you get full credit. If some fail, you get partial credit. That's the way it works. And so no, I won't be looking at the source code. And as long as all the cones pass, then that's the only thing that impacts your grade.
I had a question that's a little bit more of a pedagogical kind of question on those. Yeah, on just on why you have the cones kind of just all due on like one date as opposed to spreading them out.
Oh, it's listed to grade. I don't. Yeah. That's a good question. Honestly, it's probably because it's less work for me and the grader. They're not like really well timed with the content, so I could say, great, hey, you've got 5 weeks to do it. Do 20% each week. I suppose I need to be submitting it multiple times and things like that. I agree that there are probably concepts that you saw in the cones where it's like, this would have been good 3 weeks ago. Darn it, right? Sort of the way it is. So no, there's not any good rhyme or reason other than I'm lazy.
All right, I was just curious because I mean, yeah, that was kind of my experience, was that there were a couple times where doing the cones later, even doing them like consistently, it was like, oh, should have done this one like a little bit earlier. But yeah, I guess I didn't realize going into them that some of the concepts covered in them would be so useful. And I don't know if that's like a great, how easy or not of a revision that would be for the course to make them, timed or anything, but
yeah. No, I appreciate that. I'll make a note to see if, how we could do that. Or, or even just like, hey, check out this cone. And actually, I'd appreciate it if you could send me an email or a post or whatever with like, hey, these are the cones that were really helpful, and that, I saw them in week 4. Boy, if I'd seen these in week 2, that would have helped me with a project. So like, know specifically, and I can certainly share that. That's easy for me to share. Yeah.
All right, sure thing. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely like some of them were really useful, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like I definitely understand this concept a lot better now that I've seen it in this
Good.
cone. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Let's see here. Question from James. Has anyone else been having trouble submitting the cones when I run submit.sh cones? It just compiled my airline project. Yes. Other people have had that problem, and here's why. So on the first day of class, there was a bug. GitHub.com. Portland State getting started. There was a bug. There was some missing code. Yeah, a bug in the submit script. The submit script is new this term. I forgot to have it account for the cones project and for project 5, which we'll see tonight. I didn't detect this until like the second week of class, and a lot of you had already created your repositories. And so as a result, there's some code in the Upstream Getting Started project that is that you need to get into yours. I put out a couple of IMs about this, but I think this is the first time it's really hitting home. It's like, oh, I can't submit my cones until I get this. So here's what you need to do. Okay, good, right. And so it looks like James realized what he needs to do, but just in case there's anybody else in that situation. And by the way, you need to do this for tonight, because not only did I forget some stuff from the submit script, also the create project 5 script didn't exist. It was called project 4 because that's the way it is in the summer. So what you need to do, and I think many of you have already done this, but before you can get started on project 5, you need to get some changes. You need to get some upstream changes into your repository. So what you do is you go to your GitHub checkout, you execute this command, git remote add upstream. This will associate an upstream repository, so basically a remote repository, with yours. And then what you can do is you can get all the latest changes into your local clone. And when you do that, it'll take the changes that I've made, merge them with the changes that you've made. By the way, a number of people have run into conflicts because there's like, I've changed the same line as you have, and gets like, I don't know who's right. You figure it out. You're the developer. And so then you might need to do some commit resolution. This is all good experience working with Git. And after you've gotten everything merged and you make sure everything is building with your Maven Clean Verify, then you can commit everything and push it back. And if you're having problems with this process, please reach out. This is a little advanced, not something that I expected to have to do in this course, but because I messed up at the beginning, it's something that everybody gets to experience. And so then please let me know how it goes for you and send me feedback so I can improve it if I have to do it again in the future. Thanks for mentioning that, James. Okay, anything else? Any other topics that you'd like to discuss, explore before we dive into Project 5? Nope. Okay, let's do it. So, so far in the course, you've been working with command line programs, right? You've been writing programs that have main methods, and you send it command line arguments. It takes those arguments, it does something with it, it manipulates your airline, it writes text files, it writes XML, pretty print, all that good stuff. And that's it. And so this is giving us an opportunity to explore the Java programming language and a lot of the APIs and things like that. But it's a command line tool, and that's boring. And you know, there's still people who write command line tools. That's still part of using software. Certainly, we use them all the time, right? We use Git and things like that. But there's this newfangled thing called the World Wide Web, and it runs completely differently. So one of the things that I want to be able to explore and have you learn about in the course is how to deal with a distributed system where you've got two programs that are talking to each other, communicating. And the way I've chosen to do this is to write a web application. So what we're going to see in Project 5, and this is all ties in with the Foundations of the Web lecture and screencasts, is how you can write web applications in Java. Now, just to be clear, we are not writing web pages in Java. We're not using HTML. We're not using JavaScript. We do UI stuff, but that's all for Android. But for this, what we'll be doing is just exploring HTTP, which is the Hypertext Transport Protocol, which is the communication protocol in which the web is built. And as I cover in the lecture, there is this convention called REST, Representational State Transfer, which is all about leveraging HTTP to provide an API between a client and a server. And so what we do in Project 5 is we augment our sorry, I'm moving windows around. Augment our airline application to have to support a web service which is RESTful, which means that it communicates using this REST convention. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to explore the assignment a little bit, but really what we're going to dig into is the code. This is for Project 5. You'll be creating a brand new Maven project. It'll be a different code base. You will be exposed to different kinds of classes like servlets. You'll be looking at client code that connects to the servlet, and then you'll also be doing something like running a web container. So you'll see that we are using multiple processes and having them communicate with each other. As a matter of fact, let's see here. I think I might just skip down to the code part of it and then come back, and later in class we'll talk about sort of how the project works. Okay. So let's do that. So here I have my we'll need another terminal eventually. Here I have my checkout of my repository, just like you do. This is my Portland State Java Winter 2022 that we created on the first day of class. It has a script called createproject5.sh. When I run that, it'll create a brand new Maven project called Airline-Web. Airline-Web, yep, there it is. And so this is a Maven project. It's got things like a palm.xml. It's got our old friend Maven W, which of course I'll have to, let's see, I guess I'll have to chmod it. There we go. And now I can run it. I can do a clean and a verify. So the same Maven commands that we ran with our command line, but now clean and verify are going to do a bunch more stuff, because this is not just a simple command line project anymore. This is a web project that has multiple parts. Now, a lot of the parts will be familiar. It has source code. It has resource files. It has unit tests. It has integration tests. But as you'll see, those integration tests are very different from the ones that we used in the command line projects. But when you run verify, it does all the steps. It compiles the code. It runs the unit tests. It builds all of the artifacts. In this case, instead of actually, in addition to a jar file for running your command line program, it also creates something called a WAR file, a web archive, that we'll talk about in a little bit. And then it runs your integration tests. And here the integration tests actually start up the web application and make REST calls as part of the tests to make sure everything works. And if everything passes, poof, the build is successful. And so we've got that. So let's check in this code. Okay, so we'll say git add airline web, git status, all sorts of good stuff. And we'll talk about what most of the stuff is later. Pom.xml, and now let's see here. I think everything's been staged. So we'll say git commit, added source code for project 5, the REST API, the REST Web Service, Airline REST Web Service. Okay, and push that up to GitHub. Okay, so we now have, oh yeah, and there's also one thing I forgot to do is to run the what was it called, airline client, run the jar file. Okay, and there is a main method, and we'll look at that later, that yeah, that runs there. Okay, well, good. So I hope you're playing along at home and are following those steps. Again, what you need to do is you need to run the create project 5 script. That will create an airline-web directory. Go in there and run the project. Make sure that everything passes. And then you're good to get started. Go over a bunch of stuff and come back to it. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight, because for me, I need to see sort of pictures and drawings of all of this stuff, is what is going on with this web service. Now, there are 2 parts to this project. There are 2 programs in this project. There is a web application. So there is a program that runs the web server, and that serves up the Airline Web Application. So what you develop in this project is a web application that does things like, well, it maintains an airline. Actually maintains multiple airlines. And so you can do things like, hey, give me all the flights for an airline. You can add a flight to an airline, and you'll be able to query airlines for certain kinds of information. And that happens in something called the Jetty web container. Now, as you'll learn in the lecture, there is a standard in Java for developing web applications called the Servlet standard. And there is an open source project called Jetty that implements that standard. And that's the thing that takes care of doing all of the HTTP stuff, of actually handling the protocol and handling requests and then routing them to the appropriate servlet. And we'll talk about what a servlet is later. But there's this thing called Jetty, and this thing runs a web application. And so you can have clients like a web browser. We can also have anything that speaks HTTP. And actually, let's run it first. So the way you run it, the way you run your web server, is by using Maven. And you say Maven Jetty:run, which means use the Jetty plugin for Maven and invoke its run goal. And when you do that, that starts up the web server. So you say Maven W Jetty run. Oops, what didn't it like? Oh, there's a colon there. Maven W Jetty run. Okay, it says that your Jetty server has started, and it's got a whole bunch of debug output. That the one that I always look at is this sort of third to last message, which talks about here's which port. Oops, I'm running on. I just copied it. Sorry. And that is to the loopback address, so localhost 8080. Okay, so I just use the term localhost. So I don't know how much networking you've all done, but we've all used the internet, and so like when you have a URL, there are several parts to it. There's the first part is the protocol, which basically says, hey, here's the language that I'm speaking. So it's HTTPS, which is Secure Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So that's basically the communication protocol that it's using. Thanks, Eric. The next part for this web URL is the name of the machine that the resource lives on. So in this case, there is there's a machine out on the internet, a node on the internet called web.cecs.pdx.edu. And so the whole and so the URL also says, hey, here's which machine to go fetch some resource on. And then after that is the resource. So this is saying, hey, give me this. I say resource because is it a file? Is it a thing to interact with? It doesn't matter. It's some resource. Go fetch me this thing. And what you'll be implementing is basically the ability to fetch something. But all of this runs on some machine and on some port. Now, this is using the default port, which is port 80. But I'm running my Jetty. It's been configured to run on port 8080. And on localhost means like on the local machine. So now if I go and I say HTTPS and I say localhost, localhost 8080, I'm going to hit I'm going to hit that URL and it says, hey, give me the root resource, because I didn't have anything to the right of that. And it says, hey, wait, that's 404 not found. Hey, did you mean airline? Yeah, sure, airline. So now it goes to the airline resource, and it serves up this content right here. This is the application. So this running Jetty thing over here is what's serving up, which is what is serving up this application. If I were to Control-C and quit my Jetty, it's all done. And if I reload it, it's not there anymore because I stopped the web server. So Jetty is the web server that runs and fulfills these airline requests. And so then I've got things configured so that you can have airline, you can have flights in airline. Oh, actually, sorry, they're not called flights yet, are they? It's airline. What are they called? Oh no, flights. Okay. Oh yeah, there are no flights yet. Okay, that would explain it. So anyway, you've got the web server running here. Now, when you hit this URL, the /airline, the web server is configured to return back this simple HTML, which has a bunch of HTML forms, like 1996 style HTML, because it works, that implement a very simple application. This is the application that this project comes with out of the box, and your job is to learn enough about this application so you can then modify it to manage your airline and its flights, which is the ultimate purpose here. But I give you this out of the box so that you can get started, so you can explore with HTTP, and so I can demonstrate it here in class. What the demonstration application is that you maintain a dictionary. You basically have a word and you have definitions. And so you can do things like create a new word definition pair. So you can say, doe is a deer, female deer. And then you click submit. That then makes a HTTP post request back to the web server and creates this new pairing, this new entry in the dictionary for doe, a deer, a female deer. Now we go back and we can do other things like list all the word definition pairs. Great, there it is. There is the definition. We can also look up a definition for a particular word. So we can look up doe and it returns the one because there's really no difference there. So let's see here. Then you have ray, drop of sun. There it is. And now if we go back to airline, we get the sort of main menu again, where you can then look at everything, or you can look at ray. I'm pretty sure that's how you spell ray in solfege. Et cetera, et cetera. So here we have an HTML interface to the web application. Okay. Now, the thing about HTTP and the thing about REST is that you don't have to, HTTP is just a protocol. It doesn't really care what the client is. So here the client is my Chrome web browser, and it's speaking, okay, HTML forms and things like that. But you can also access HTTP just using a Java program. And so that's the whole idea of the, nope. CD PSU, get Portland State Java, winter, Portland State Java, winter 2022, Airline Web. There we go. There is also, if you run the executable jar, that gives you a main method, which you can also make these same web calls that were in the browser, right? So when I click, hey, give me all of the definitions in the dictionary, I can get that same thing by invoking it with, well, first the host and then the port. And if I don't give it any other arguments, it returns the 2 words in the dictionary. Similarly, if I can make a mapping between me, the name I call myself. No, what didn't? Oh, I didn't have the host and port. Here you go. I just made a definition there. And now if I reload this, poof, it shows up. Because what's happening, and I guess because I've got the web container over here, I was using the web browser to call, to basically send these same kind of URLs to it. And now, in addition to the web browser, I'm using my Project 5 main, my main class right there. So this is probably pretty different from what you're used to. What you're used to is that I write a program and it starts here and it ends there, and then the JVM exits. Well, the JVM doesn't exit over here in the web server. It just sits there and it keeps, handling requests. So it'll sit there and handle requests until I Control C it and turn it off and kill the process, which I suppose I could do. So I killed it, and as we saw before, now if I try to refresh it in the web browser, it's like I can't reach the site. Similarly, if I try to run the program again, it's hard to read. Oops. There we go. If I run the command line program again, it's saying connection refused because the server's not running anymore. So I'll just restart it. Run my program again, and it's empty. Now the reason it's empty is because the program doesn't persist the dictionary entries. It doesn't write it out to disk. It just keeps stuff in memory, which is fine for this project. So that's the architecture, if you will, of this project. You now have 2 Java programs running at the same time, one of which is your Jetty web container, which handles the HTTP requests. And then the other one is your Project 5, which makes HTTP requests and then handles whatever comes back. Before I move on and start looking at code, I wanted to pause for questions, because these are new concepts, having 2 programs that talk to each other. What is confusing? What doesn't make sense? What would you like to dive into a little bit here before we look at code?
I had 2 questions really quick.
Yeah.
So the first one, I know that anything we run on the Linux server through PSU, we can have that, the web interface. Is it possible to do this and run it through like our student web page? Do you know?
Student web page.
Does that make sense?
Well, I'm not sure that it does.
So if on our Linux server, if we put anything in the public HTML folder.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, I was curious if it was possible for us to actually run this just as a test.
That's a really good question. I think the answer is no, because of the following. So when you put something in your public underbar HTML, that is static content that is served up. That's basically like, here, and actually I can go and show you. So if I SSH to my Linux, I don't know why I opened up a new command window to do this, but anyway, so if I go to my public HTML directory, here is all the stuff. I can go to the PDF directory, and like here is the the rest. Oops, CD PDF. Here we go. And then the rest.pdf. These are just files, right? There's nothing special going on here. The Jetty, and sorry, those files are there, and I'm pretty sure that the cat runs an Apache server or something, which will then serve up that content, right? So it's Apache server, which is basically acting like your web container, which is handling the HTTP request that comes in and says, oh, okay, right, yeah, you're asking for ~Whitlock PDF REST API, great. I'm gonna go read the file that is, in which is here on the disk, is right there, right? So it basically goes and reads files. That's all the Apache server, basically, that's all the Apache server is doing for you. Here, we're running our own web server in this Jetty web container, and it has, as we'll see, it's not just serving up files, it is executing Java code in response to HTTP requests. So I could do something like, actually, sure, let's just give that a try since I'm here. What we could do is we could go to, my 2022. We can go and pull down my latest code. It should give me I will type my password right one of these days. I will not. There we go. I just got all my airline web stuff. And now if I run maven w jetty run, if I run this here, now remember, I'm running on the PSU machine. It, of course, is downloading half the internet. That's the way it goes, because it needs some jar files. Great, it says it's running. Now I think I can go to, it looks like I am on Rita. So I can go to HTTP. I can go to rita.cat.pdx.edu:8080. No, it is. Yep, there's my airline. So now I've got nothing here. So again, I'm running this on the PSU machine. Now, if I go back to my command line and I run this thing, on rita.cat.pdx.edu:8080, and I can say hello world. It shows up there. So you can run your web server on a PSU machine. It's possible. I'm going to grade it that way, but you probably don't want to develop it that way, right? You probably want to develop it locally. But notice that it can't run on port 80 because 80 is restricted. The lower 1024 ports users don't have permission to. Most users don't have permission to access. But you can run it on port 8080. But I don't think it's kosher for just people to be running just random processes forever and ever on the PSU machines. So if you want to serve your own web application up there, work with the cat to figure out the right way to do that.
All right, sweet. And then I guess the other question I had was, I think I saw something about on the main page, like these HTML files aren't part of the project.
Yes.
It's just about the Java that goes with it.
Yep.
Okay.
And so then, yes, this HTML right here is meant to, hey, listen, let's say that, you're of a certain age and like doing old school HTML is like how you learned to program and maybe thought how you're going to be a millionaire by the time you're 25. But anyway, if you're comfortable working with HTML, great, go for it. Actually, this was originally contributed by a student who said, "Wow, it really helped me to have this index.html. How about you share with everybody else?" I'm like, "Okay, fine." It actually makes for great demos and things like that, but it is not part of the assignment. So what you'll be doing is you'll be changing the REST API, and it'll end up breaking this because this sort of assumes certain names for things and certain numbers of parameters to everything, and that's not what the project is going to end up doing. However, if some students have found it helpful to have this to develop their project 5 with. We might look a little bit at it next week. Next week we'll dive into some of the implementation and testing and things like that. But for now, we just want to, I'll just call out that yep, this is something that you can work with. But it's not part of the. It's not actually. As a matter of fact, I don't even think it's submitted. I don't think you can submit HTML files. So not something you'll be graded on. Great questions. Okay. Anything else before we start looking at some code? Are people playing along at home? Have people been able to create the project okay and at least run Maven clean verify? Anybody? Okay, yep, created project, thanks. Okay, cool. Because this project is a little bit more complex, sometimes students' environments aren't set up, or I've messed something up in the creation. So I encourage you all, if you're not doing it here in real time, because I know it's kind of hard to keep up with everything, please make sure to do so as soon as possible, because there's a problem. I definitely want to fix it. Okay, so just to reiterate, let me clean up some of these windows I have. Let's see here. Here I am on Rita. I'm going to stop this. By the way, I did that with just Control-C to stop the process. I'm going to log out of here, and I'm going to close this window. Here I am. I've got my Jetty running over here on the left. I've got my command line over here on the right. Let's go back and look at the architecture again. As you can see, there are a couple of Java classes. So over here on the right, on the server side, there's something called the Airline Servlet. Over here on the left in the client, there's something called Project 5, which uses the Airline REST client. And so what the client does is it makes HTTP requests that ultimately get handled by the server, and the server will return some results. Let's open up the project in IntelliJ and start diving into all of this stuff. Oh, Eric, thanks for verifying that yes, you're able to get it to work, and that on Windows, yep, you need to give it firewall access. You have to use port 8080. That makes sense. Okay. Let's close out some of this stuff. Oops, I'm gonna hide meeting controls again. Let's see here. All this not so interesting. I'm just gonna close all tabs. Okay. And let's close all these too. Just start over from scratch. Okay, so I need to get my changes. That will load the changes. I also need to reload my Maven project because I created a new Maven project. Oh, okay, I did it automatically. Yay. Okay, let's look at this airline web source code. So it's looking pretty familiar. Great, I've got like the source directory. It's got the Maven project. It's got the pom.xml. It's got integration tests and main and test. Let's look in the main. It's got Java. It's got this thing called a web app. So web app has a bunch of stuff in it, including this index.html, and that's what was displayed right here. Oh, sorry, not that one. That's what's displayed right here. That's the index.html. So if you want to modify that, you can. There's also something called an error.jsp, which is for handling error messages, and there's also something called web.xml, which is a configuration for the web archive or the WAR file. So when the source code is built, so the Java files are compiled into class files, and so far we've been working with jar files. The jar files contain all the class files and things like your resources, all get bundled into one file, which is nice and easy to pass around and download and everything like that. For web applications, there is a fancy kind of jar file called a WAR file, a web archive, that contains, yes, your Java source code, but also a bunch of configuration information about the web application, which is contained in that WAR file. And that's what this is right here. You shouldn't need to modify it, but it tells you things like, hey, there is this thing called an Airline Servlet, and that's important to know, and that Airline Servlet is mapped to the /flights URL fragment. And by the way, there's this error page. And so then this /flights right here is the same thing as, oops, let's figure out, I need that right now, is the same thing as this /flights right here. So the whole idea is the web container, when it gets when it receives a request for a URL, the first thing it does is it looks at this first chunk right here of the resource. It says, aha, airline. Okay, that routes to the airline web application. It's called Airline. Then it looks at the /flights, and we've configured the web application to route /flights to this Airline Servlet. And so this Airline Servlet is the thing that handles the HTTP requests of /airline/flights. Let's take a look at that Airline Servlet. So servlets, the Servlet API is the standard API that basically is the contract between something like Jetty, which is an open source project, and the code that you write, which is the thing that implements your application. In this case, we're implementing a web application that manages an airline. And so our airline class extends HTTP Servlet, which is a standard class from the Java X Servlet API package. And so this is Java code, nothing fancy here, but this Java code is invoked in response to an HTTP request. Now, this is all covered in detail in the lecture, but HTTP has different verbs associated with it. So when it comes to doing something with a resource like /airline/flights, you can get the resource, you can post to the resource, you can put to the resource, you can delete the resource. There's a thing called head. There's a couple other things. But for this project, what we care most about is get and post. And so, and maybe this is something that you didn't realize, is that when you interact with a URL, it's not just always fetching it. It's not always saying, hey, just give me this URL. You can also say, hey, send some data to this URL, and that's what a post is. A post actually sends some data to a URL as opposed to getting the contents of a URL. And that's why you've probably seen it in your web browser, right? Where sometimes if you try to refresh the page, it'll give you this kind of funny warning saying, hey, you're about to repost information again. So like, don't buy your kitty litter twice because you're reloading the page, stuff like that. The reason that you get that error is because your web browser is saying, hey, listen, you're posting data up there again. Are you sure you want to do that a second time? So the way the Servlet API works is that there are methods that correspond to each one of the each one of the HTTP verbs. So there is a method called doGet that will be invoked by the Servlet engine, by Jetty, by the web container, when the /airline/flights URL is receives a GET request. So basically, the code that's executed is right here. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to debug this. So this is something that I don't remember if we've really seen this before. So in project 5, debugging becomes very important. And actually, I just closed that tab, didn't I? So I added, let's see here. There we go, great. Here in the README, and this is in my repository, and I think it's in your repository too, I have some information about how to debug Java code. So this is the process by which you you run your Java code in a special mode, and it's listening for a debugger to attach. And then as code is executed in the JVM, it interacts with the debugger, and you can do things like, hey, say run the code until this line is hit, and then hey, wait, pause, and let me inspect what's going on. It's really great. I'm going to give you some. I'm going to show you how to do this, but I encourage you to read this to really read this, and then the things that the references to really work with it. How funny! It's all highlighting syntax and stuff. Now let's see here. A little bit later on, we'll look at just debugging a Java command line program like Project 5. But instead, because we want to debug the servlet, so we're going to look at what's happening in the JVM that's running the servlet. We need to do this, the following. So there's a bunch of magic here, which is all explained in the on the README of your repository. But hear me now and believe me later that you can set this environment variable called Maven Ops. And what this will do is, oh, interesting. I have to spend yes here. Okay. Now what this will do is that when I run my Maven, it starts the program starts with hey, listen, I'm waiting for you to connect to this process with a debugger on port 5005. And so I can do that from IntelliJ. Let me hide my stuff here. By here under this menu right here, you create a new configuration. And by the way, there's plenty of documentation that's referenced on the README to tell you how to do this. You create a new remote JVM debug. Oops. We're going to call it localhost 5005. Now, things get a little tricky here because we're dealing with two ports. The port 8080 is the port on which the Jetty communicates over HTTP. It uses port 5005 for Java debugging. So now actually what you have is you have multiple processes that are interacting with the Jetty server. One is debugging on port 5005. The other one is doing HTTP requests on port 8080. So I create this configuration right here. Now this activates this little debug icon. And now when I click it, IntelliJ says, great, you've connected to the server, you've connected to the Java process. Now the Jetty, now Maven is starting up, is doing all of its Jetty things. Now the Jetty server is running. Over here in the margin, in the gutter, if you click, if there is a line of code that's executed on that line, a little red dot will appear to say this is a breakpoint in the debugger. So I think some of you have used a debugger before, maybe GDB, it was on the command line, it was kind of awkward. This is much nicer in my opinion. Visually, you can very easily say, great, stop on this line when it's executed. So this is the first line of the do-get method. So now I'm going to go back to my form here, and I happen to know that whenever you list something, it does a get. A get of the URL. So I'm going to click the submit button, and when I did, that sent a request to Jetty. But because Jetty is being debugged right now, it stopped in this line of the debugger, right here in the do-get method. So when I do a get request for the URL, the do-get method is invoked. And so now what I can do is I can use these controls down here to walk my code, basically one line at a time, to see what's going on. And what the debugger also allows me to do is to inspect the the data, the objects that are being used by my program. So let's take a look at what we've got here. We've got the doGet method, and it's got a couple of parameters. It's got something called an HTTP Servlet request and an HTTP Servlet response. So what these two objects do is, well, they represent the data that is sent with the request, with a request from the requester, which in this case is the web browser. And it also has an object that represents the data that we'll send back in the response to the request. And this is what the program does. It interrogates the information in the request to then figure out what information you need to send back in the response. Now, this first line here on line 34, what it does is it says, hey, listen, response. What I'm going to be sending you back is just plain old text. So you might be familiar with MIME types. Every HTTP protocol specifies that you can set the content type, which is the MIME type, of the response. So here I'm just sending back plain text. We can send back anything. You can send back HTML or XML or an image or a PDF or whatever, right? HTTP doesn't care what kind of data is sent back. It just has its rules for the protocol. And one of those rules is like, hey, I'm going to tell the client, I'm going to tell the thing that receives the response, here's what I'm sending you. So it then knows what to do with it. It's like, oh, good, this is a JPEG, great. I'm going to, render it as a JPEG, or oh, this is a PDF, great. I'm going to, download it or something, right? So that's what the client does with the response. So when I click the step over, it goes to the next line. And so what do we do? Okay. The first thing we do is get a parameter. So now if we look at our request object, you can open up and inspect the objects down here in this variables section. You can look at you're basically looking at the source code here. This is some Jetty object here that represents a request. But you can see it's got information about, like, here's what the context path is. Here's what the URI is. The URL is. What else is interesting? A whole bunch of internal stuff. Let's see here, but it's telling you, hey, there are no parameters to it. Okay, well, that's interesting. So right now the debugger is stopped here on line 36. That's where the blue is. If we then click in the step into, that will step into the get parameter method. Now we are executing the get parameter method. The first thing that we do there is we get the we call the get parameter method from the HTTP Servlet request that was passed in. And that returns the value here, which is null because there were no parameters sent in. And I'll show you what parameters are shortly. And we say, okay, great. If the parameter is null or was empty, return null, which is exactly what we'll do. Now we've popped up the stack one. Now we're in the doGet method. And the word that was returned is null. Okay. And since the word, if the word doesn't equal null, write the definition. Otherwise, we will write all of the dictionary entries to the HTTP Servlet response. And we'll do that. And then that's it. We're done. Now, we're done. Well, the doGet method is done. Our code is done. But if you look here in the call stack, as you can see, there's a gazillion methods that are up on the call stack for handling all of this stuff. But you know what? We don't care. That's all internal Jetty stuff. That's all this implementation of the Servlet API. That's the magic that we rely on to just work, right? That's like the linked list class or the array list class, right? You don't really care how it works. You just know that it does work. And you've got lots of code to demonstrate that it does. So what I'll do is I'll just click this continue, this resume program button. And that basically says, hey, just keep running. And so it does. And sure enough, there are no flights there. Now let's go and add a flight. And we can do that. Let's go back to the forms. And we'll say, oh dear, there. Click submit. Cool. And there it is. And so now when we list all of the words, okay, we're back here in the debugger because we still have this breakpoint set in doGet. We've done a get request again. And let's just step over things. Oops, No, that's not what I wanted. Meh. There we go. We set the content type. We get the word parameter. There is no parameter that is sent in with the URL. We will see that shortly. And now we write all the dictionary entries, and we're done with the method. So we'll just continue and move on. And now back in the browser, what was sent back to the browser this time was doe, a deer, a female deer. Okay. Now let's look for the definition of the word doe. Now, when I do this, it's, let's see here. Do I have, no, I don't have that yet. What this does is it makes, actually, let me just, before we dive into it, let me just show you what it does. It sends a different URL to the servlet. It sends /airline/flights $word equals doe. So in URL speak, everything that appears after the question mark, to the right of the question mark, are these key value pairs that are the parameters. Each parameter has a name, like word, and it has a value, like doe. And so then when I hit the URL /airline/flights $word equals doe, it returns just the definition for doe. I'm going to reload this page so we can see under the debugger what it does. Okay, we reloaded, and now we've hit the do get again. So we set the content type. Now let's dig into the get parameter method. So this basically says get the parameter with the name. The name of the parameter is word. Okay, that's a constant for word. Get it from the request. So let's dive into that. We then called get parameter method of the request with the parameter name of word. And now the value that was returned for that is doe. Okay. Because that is on the URL, that is the value of doe. Sorry, is the value of word is doe. Okay, so now the word is doe. Word doesn't equal no. And so now what we'll do is we will write the definition. We're into the method, and we continue on. And now it returns doe, a deer, female deer. So the do get method, and we'll see a little bit later, the do post. These are the things that handle the HTTP requests and that basically implement the logic of your web service. And this is all Java code. This is really nothing magical because what Jetty does is it takes the HTTP request, which if you actually look at the raw text of it, it's just some protocol. And what it does is it translates it into not only routing of the, not only identifying, oh, here's the servlet that handles that request, but then Jetty is the thing that goes and creates these instances of HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response that allow your program just to work with those objects to abstract out all of the stuff that is sent to the server and then sent back from the server. I think this makes for actually kind of nice coding because you're just dealing with Java. You don't need to worry about all the HTTP stuff. If you just implement do get and do post, you can focus on the logic of your program, which is this stuff right here, and not have to worry about the fact that it's running inside a web application. I want to pause here for questions. So we've seen a couple of things. We've seen debugging. We have seen the beginnings of implementing our servlets. What can I tell people? What makes sense? What is confusing? I do see a couple of chats. So let's see here from Eric. Some commentary. Being able to see the live variables is so nice. Helped me a ton during Project 3. Great. Glad you're. Yeah. Thanks for taking advantage of the debugger. It will save you a lot of time. Question from the other Eric. Would that be considered a path param and API lingo? Path param, maybe. I don't know if I've heard the word path param, but there might be some REST APIs that use that terminology. Good question. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, let's take a break. I've been talking for an hour. I'm a little parched. I'm going to go get something to drink. Let's take 15 minutes and be back at 7:05. Okay, and we're back. Okay, still talking HTTP, still talking Project 5, servlets, and all that good stuff. Really quick review what we did so far in class. We created a new Maven project for Project 5. We saw that it was in two parts. Go back to the architecture diagram. There is, over here on the right, there is the Jetty web server, and over here on the left, there is the client. We talked about how the Jetty web server contains these things called web applications. There's the Airline Web Application, and its work is done by the Airline Servlet. And as a matter of fact, it's the Airline Servlet's code that is invoked when someone requests the /airline/flights URL. We attached with a debugger and stepped through what happens on the do-get method, which the logic is pretty straightforward. It goes and it gets the parameter from the URL, and again, the parameter on the URL, just hide all this stuff, is all the stuff to the right of the question mark. It's word equals dough. And so then when word equals dough, the word is dough, and we write the definition for dough back to the response, and that's what is ultimately sent back to the browser or to the client, that code there. So a question came in during break from Jacob. I think I understand the job of the servlet code that has to fulfill the HTTP requests, but what is the job of the client program that we're writing? That's a good question, and we can look at that next if you'd like. So the client code is, let's see here, let's hide that. When we run the client code, let's do this on localhost 8080. Oh, sorry, you run the client code, you hit the get hits the get URL also, which also hits the debugger. So now let's just do it once more, which we're feeling. Here, I'm not asking for the definition of any word, and so the word will be null, and so I'll write all the dictionary entries, and then I'm done. And what the what is returned is the information, the same stuff that is sent to the sent back to the client that we saw in the web browser, but now it parses it in. Well, it basically says, "Oh, great! It's a dictionary that contains one word." Similarly, if we ask for just the definition of dough, it again hits the get URL. We're just going to resume. We're just going to skip over that, and it prints out that single definition. So let's look at the code that does that. So what this code does, instead of the stuff that happens here on the servlet, which is all about responding to requests, the code in the client creates the request and sends it to the server. Let's see how it does that. If we look at Project 5, Project 5 has a main method, right? And this is just like what you've seen before. So this is just a Java command line program. Really nothing too fancy here except like what it does. So it goes and parses the command line, so it gets the host, the port, and the word and definition. This command line parsing is a little more straightforward than what your programs do. It does some checking to make sure that the right stuff is there. It parses the port, blah 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 blah. And the real work that it does is in this Airline REST client. So what there's this class called Airline REST client, which is depicted here in the architecture. This is the thing that does the heavy lifting of actually putting together the HTTP request and then sending it to the server, to the web server, the container. So it creates this REST client object and says, well, if the word is null, then we're going to print all of them. So it calls the get all dictionary entries, which returns a map of string to string. And, the dictionary. And then it uses a tool called Pretty Printer. Oh, look at that, to dump the contents of the dictionary to a string writer, and then returns then gets the value of what was written to that string writer and puts it in this message variable, which is ultimately just printed out to system.out. So now let's look at this code. And as a matter of fact, let's do that under the debugger also. So we saw here that you can set this Maven ops environment variable to debug Maven. So when we run Jetty, we run it in Maven. So that's how you debug Maven. But if you want to debug on the command line, instead of setting an environment variable to this big old agent lib thing, which you can read about on your own, we instead just put that directly onto the command line. So we have all of this. I'm just going to copy it here. And now when we run the command line, before the jar or after the jar, but definitely before the command line arguments, we're going to put all of that stuff, that -agent lib, and we're going to choose a different port because we're going to be debugging two processes now, which is going to get really wacky, but we're going to see how it does it. So we're going to be debugging the client on port 5006. Now we run that program and saying, okay, I'm waiting for a debugger to attach. So let's we'll use the same IntelliJ, and it's going to get a little wacky because we'll be debugging both the client and the server. And let's just set a breakpoint here in the main method so we can step through here. We need to create a different configuration for port 006. I believe we can just duplicate this. Oh, was this copy right here? Yes. Copy it right here. And we're going to call that port 5006, port 5006. That's good there. And we are going to attach to that. Now, check this out. IntelliJ has two debugger sessions going. Right now, there's the port 5005, which is the servlet, and there's 5006, which is the command line right there. Now, this is kind of wacky because not only are we running two programs at the same time, we're debugging two programs at the same time, and it's in the same source code. It gets a little confusing, but this is what happens when you have two programs. It just gets more complex, and debugging gets more complex too. So we'll go through and we'll parse the arguments. I'm going to start using the keyboard shortcut. So it's F8 for me for step over and F7 to step in. So I'm going to go F8 to step through all of what's happening there. So I identified the host, identified the port string, identified the word as do. I'm done with the loop, and so now I can see here in the debugger, my host name is localhost, my port string is 8080, and these are the values of these variables up here. And it's nice and IntelliJ sort of highlights this stuff here. Oh, let's click on that. Oh, nice. Let's inspect that. That's cool. So let's see here. If my host name is null, it's an error. It is not. My port string is null. And it's not. If my it's going to convert it into an int, and it is. Okay, great. Now I'm going to create a new host, a new airline REST client with the host name and the port. I'm going to step into this to see what it's like. Okay, here's what we do. In this constructor here, we format a big old string to get us the URL that we're going to access. And so now the URL is HTTP localhost 8080 airline flights. So this is the beginnings of the code that is going to ultimately create that HTTP request off to the server, and here is the URL that it uses. Okay, so now we've got one of those airline REST clients. The word is not null, so I'm not going to print all of them. Instead, we're going to do the following. We are going to call client.getDefinition, and then we're going to call this format dictionary entry thing after that. So I am going to step into with F7, and it gives me a choice of, hey, what method did you want to step into? I want to step into getDefinition, so the getDefinition of word. Okay, so here I am in the airline REST client in the getDefinition method of here's my word. So what am I going to do here? Well, I'm going to put together that HTTP request and send it off, get its response, and do something with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create this. Oh, I'm going to call this get method. Now get method. Now, by the way, okay. And so Airline REST client extends HTTP request helper, which is one of my classes that I wrote for your benefit. So this helps you make, well, it provides methods for requesting resources via HTTP. So this is a thing that will ultimately query the, well, not query, we'll make the HTTP request of the server. And there are methods that I hope that'll make it a little easier for you, but you got to figure out how to use them. So there's a get method, and we're going to step into that using F7. We're going to step into the get method. And here, it takes a URL string. So that's the URL. I can just probably hover over it or something. Can I? Maybe I can't. Nope. The URL string is localhost 8080 airline flights. And then the parameters are a map. And I can expand that to say, hey, word is mapped to dough. Okay, that's nice. And so now what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to create that big old URL. And okay, nice. So now I've made a URL object. And by the way, I'm just debugging this code to show you what it does. You're not going to need to change it because this is my code. I have a URL that represents localhost 8080 airline flights .. word equals dough. I'm going to say, okay, open up a connection to that URL. I'm going to do a get there. I need to set this do input and output to true. And now I'm going to create this response object around that connection. This will go off and it will query well, it'll invoke the REST API by sending that HTTP request there. So I'm going to step into this, step over this. That sent the request off to the query, and now the servlet got invoked. And so now we're back over here in servlet land. Notice that we're debugging localhost 5005, the servlet, the Jetty, and we're no longer active in the on the command line because it has made this request and is waiting for a response. And so let's give it the response. So it's going to set the content type. It's going to get the parameter, which is dough. It is going to write the definition of dough. Let's just step into that. If the definition is null, we've got an error. Otherwise, we're going to get print writer. We are going to create a map. We're going to use something called a text dumper to then dump that map to some text. Oh, and by the way, what the text dumper dumps to is the print writer that is returned from the response. So this is the print writer. It's a Java IO print writer. It's just the same print writer that you learned about in week 2 or whatever. But this is a print writer that writes to the response back to the client. This is the thing I like about the Servlet API. It doesn't try to invent the wheel. It says, well, great, we've got this response object that sends some text back someplace. Let's just use a standard class like print writer to represent all of that, which is great because it's something that we're all familiar with. So it uses the text dumper to dump the text of the dictionary to that print writer. So it dumps that, and then it says, okay, my status of the response. So HTTP has this notion of a status, right? You've all seen it, the 404 not found or 200. Okay, yep, it's going to be SCOK, which is 200. And there we go. That's that. We have written the definition. We are done with that, and now we are going to continue on. This sends the response back. And now back here in our client, this is back on the client side, we get that response. If the response is not okay, if it's not 200, we'll throw an exception. In this case, we do not. We get the content, and here is the content that was written: doe : a deer, a female deer. We're then going to use a class called text parser to read that text that was written, that doe, deer, female deer. To then, when we call the parse method, I believe let's find out. Call the parse method. It returns an airline. Oh, interesting. So, okay, so what I did here was I created something that essentially is your text parser. Now, this is the wrong implementation of it, obviously, and we'll see why we use this when we look at the assignment in more detail here in a few minutes. But we go and we, okay, sure. Oh, wait, really? Huh. What am I looking at there? Interesting. Oh, do I have two text parsers now? I very well may. Yeah, I don't think I got the right one. It got confused. Yep. Oh, isn't that interesting? Sorry, this is the code that it should have been debugging into. What? Yeah, I have two classes with the same name. Huh, that's interesting. I think this is the first time that I've really debugged into the text parser. But anyway, basically what I did was, okay, right, this parse method returns a map. You're going to want to replace this with your actual text parser that returns an airline. But meanwhile, I go and I get the map that I parsed from the string contents, and I return the value of the key word in that map, which, not surprisingly, is the definition deer, female deer. And then I call format dictionary entry, which, okay, whatever. And that returns then the message doe, a deer, female deer. And you print it out, and we exit. And so that was the round trip. That's all that's happening, beneath the surface here when you call localhost, when you invoke the main program with localhost 8080 and doe. Just to walk through the code again, it parses the command line. It gets the host port and the word to look up. Because word is not null, then it goes and calls the get definition method from the client, which goes and creates a URL with the parameters word of whatever the word was, in this case doe. It goes and makes that query. We saw what happens in the servlet, and it gets the response. It pulls the it parses the map out of the string that was sent back from the server. Because by the way, HTTP only speaks in text, so it's like text that you send back and forth. So even when you get an HTTP image, it's still text underneath the covers. And then it parses a map of key value pairs, the dictionary there, and then it gets the value of doe from that and returns that. And then it calls this format dictionary entry, which just takes a word and definition and formats it, and then prints it out. I'm going to pause for questions. Nope. Jacob, did I give you a better idea what happens on the client side? Cool. Okay. Now that we've sort of gotten a peek at the code, let's take a look at the assignment again, because I think now it's time to talk about what this thing is actually going to do. So you're seeing what it's doing now. What it's doing now is that it's a very simple key value pair dictionary REST service, right? Okay, and that's neat. And now we're going to augment to do something with our airline. So, and the whole idea is that we're going to be learning about web applications. We're going to be getting experience with HTTP for communicating between two programs. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to augment the airline servlet. And so what it's doing is that it's providing access to actually multiple airlines, not just one airline, but to multiple airlines. And so then when and here the specification that I provide say, well, when this URL is hit with these verbs, here's why I should have it to happen. So when you have like the airline flights and you give it a particular airline name, when it's invoked with get, the do get method, is going to return all the flights in the airline format using your XML dumper. So here, what it is, it's a REST API where the URLs return XML. Right now, what's there is a REST API that returns text, but now we're going to use XML. You're going to have, when it's hit with get, you get all of the airlines as you get all the flights as an XML dumper. When it's hit with a post, this is what creates a new flight from the HTTP request, and it requires parameters such as airline, flight number, source, depart, dest, and arrive. If the airline doesn't exist yet, create a new airline. So this is the same kind of functionality that you had in your project 4. You are creating, you are populating an airline with its flights. There's also new functionality, and that's a querying functionality. So if this URL, so /airline/flights with an airline name, a source, and a destination, if that URL is handled, or rather that URL is sent a GET request, then it returns all the given flights formatted as XML that originate from the source airport and terminate at the destination airport. So that's looking for all the flights between two airports. And note that, unlike in the previous assignments, the web application supports multiple airlines. As a matter of fact, you're not writing any of these airlines to disk. Just for the sake of simplicity, in this project, all of the airlines are kept in memory. That's fine as long as your airline, as long as your JVM doesn't crash, as long as you don't call system.exit from your servlet. Hint, hint, don't do that. However, and I guess you don't really use the text. You don't use the text dumper, but you certainly use the XML dumper. So that's what happens on the servlet side. Basically, you're responding to URLs and sending back XML. Now, on the client side, we have that Project 5 program, and it's going to it's going to have some additional parameters now that look a little bit like what your projects 1 through 4 look like, but not exactly the same. So it's got arguments and it's got options. The arguments are kind of what we're used to: airline, flight number, source, depart, destination, and arrival. But it's got some different options. Now you give it a host name and a port. You can also say -search, and so when -search is specified, only the airline source and destination are required. And when that happens, you do the query to get the all the flights between source and destination, and you should pretty print it to standard out. You should pretty print that result to standard out. That's the search option, and then you've also got the print option and the README, just like you did previously. But you don't have -text file, you don't have -XML file, and you don't have -pretty. Instead, that functionality is used elsewhere in the program. By the way, host and port must both be specified. Or rather, they must. If you're going to have port, you should also have host. Here are some examples of how to use the client. So you can add a flight to the server by saying, by using the client jar and giving it the host and the port. And here's an example of AirDave, flight 123 from PDX to Chicago. Right, ORD, is that? That's O'Hare, right? Yeah. You can also search for a flight between two airports. So it's between, it's on AirDave from Portland to Los Angeles. Note that a message should be printed if there is no direct flight between the two specified airports. And then, yes, you can also pre-print all of the flights in an airline by providing just the name of the airline and no source and destination and no other parameters to create a flight. So that's the functionality that you need to have in the client. All sorts of things can go wrong. So additional error handling. So obviously your command line is not correct if the data time is not correct. If you can't reach the server, if you can't reach the web server, then you should have a friendly error message there. Or if the data that you pass to the REST URL is not correctly formatted. So if I don't know. Maybe you have an airport code that isn't valid or something like that. You should get a reasonable error message. So that's the functionality of Project 5. Any questions about that? The intent is that this is familiar, but of course, doing it is going to be a whole separate thing, a whole new thing, because you haven't worked with the REST API before. No. Okay, one more thing I want to debug with everybody. I want to look at the post method. So what happens when we execute a post? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect from the client, and I'm not going to, which actually I guess I didn't need to because the program terminated. I am going to, I'm just going to run doe deer and then ray, a drop of golden sun. So here, when I do that, that creates a definition. And now when I look at all the flights, I'm going to hit the debugger. I'm not going to debug do get anymore. So I'm going to debug do post. Great, now I've got a dictionary with 2 definitions there. Now I'm going to create a third one. Me a name I call myself. Okay, now here I am in the do post method. Now, again, when I'm creating data, I invoke I send a post query to post request to the servlet, and so now I'm in the do post method. This actually looks pretty similar, right? So I'm basically saying, hey, I'm going to send you back text. But now when I get the parameters, I expect that they're all there. So here I'm going to get the parameter of me, and that's going to be the word that I'm going to define, and the definition is going to be a name I call myself, and we read this from the HTTP request. And now I've got the dictionary object. I'm just going to put the word in the definition. I'm going to use my print writer, and I'm going to, oh, I still have defined word as. Okay, well, this is just a little message string, which you can or cannot, you could use if you want, but you don't have to. You're going to be sending back, you can send back a message, or you could send back some XML. Doesn't really matter, I guess. Send that to the print writer to the response. Say, yes, everything's okay. And poof, continue on. It said, yes, I defined me as a name I call myself. And sure enough, when we go back to the servlet, now all that's there. So basically what I wanted to show is that when you create a post request, it's handled differently, and so your logic is different. On the client side, I'll just walk through the code. I don't feel the need to step through it. We call the add dictionary entry on the client, which then creates a post to the same URL. So this is the code where before, when we said get definition, we did a get from that URL. Well, now we do a post to that URL with the word and the definition. And that's it. We don't do anything with the response here. Okay, that's fine. So this is the code that you're going to need to modify to implement Project 5. Any questions about the requirements for Project 5 or this code? Nope. Okay, let's talk about how to test this code. Now, by the way, just like in projects 1 through 4, there is a requirement to have tests for your code. You need to have a minimum of 75% code coverage. Now, this code looks really different than what we did before, right? You've got these processes, you've got this HTTP GET, you've got all this servlet stuff that takes response objects and everything like that. How are you going to test this? Well, the answer is it can be tested, but you need to use some new tools. So over here, we do have some unit tests. And let's see here. I've got some basic, this is like a plain old unit test that tests those silly little text dumper and text parsers that I wrote. No big deal there. What's way more interesting is the Airline Servlet test. So let's look at our servlet. We've got methods like doGet that take a servlet request and a servlet response and do something with it. How could you possibly test that? I mean, how do you create an HTTP servlet request object? Does it have a constructor? Actually, no, it's an interface. So what do you do here? You've basically got a bunch of classes, a bunch of APIs that you've never worked with before. Up until now, we've relied on Jetty to send us, a properly created, properly constructed HTTP servlet request and servlet response. Well, the answer, you can test this code, but you need to use a little bit of literally, I'm just going to call it magic because it is. Now, in testing, you've got code under test, and we've got something like a servlet. It takes in objects. It depends on objects that are normally created by Jetty and passed in. But you want to exercise the same code, even though you've got these objects that come from some other API, that come from the Servlet API. There's a library, there's a Java library called Mockito, which creates so-called mock objects. And mock objects are objects that implement a particular interface, but aren't real instances of those interfaces. Instead, they're these special instances of the interfaces that you can configure to behave a certain way. You can send them to the code under test, and then after the code under test is returned, you can then interrogate those objects. You can get information about those objects to make sure that the code behaves the way that you expect. And that's what this unit test does. It invokes your servlet's doGet method. It sends it a request and a response, just like the doGet method expects, but there are these mock servlet requests and these mock servlet responses. So here's how you do that. You have a HTTP servlet request object, and the way you create it is not by saying, hey, new HTTP servlet request. Instead, you call this mock method, which is part of the Mockito API. And you give it the Java line class for HTTP servlet request. So you say HTTP servlet request.class. You've probably seen this. Actually, I know you've seen this syntax before, and you probably learned a little bit about it in the cones. And when you watch the dependency injection and then the reflection lecture, which you might need to go back and review or watch for the first time. When you go through reflection, when you go through dependency injection, you'll see how actually is dependency injection, is that where we use Mockito? No. Mockito I think is with reflection. I can't remember now. Anyway, when you get these mock objects, it is an object that implements this interface, so you can send it to your doGet method, but it's not it's not the same implementation that you're going to get when you're running inside Jetty, because you're not running inside Jetty right now. You're running inside just a plain old Java VM when you're running your unit test. So you can mock your request and your response, and those are the objects that get sent to your doGet. And your doGet method is going to take these objects and it's going to interact with them, right? It's going to do things like it's going to send the request to the get parameter, and it's going to send the response to the right definition method. And this code right here, it doesn't know that it's being sent mock objects. All it knows is that it's being sent a request that implements HTTP servlet request and a response that implements HTTP servlet response. And that's fine. It shouldn't have to know that it's dealing with a mock object versus a real object. But what you need to do is you need to configure your mock objects to behave the way that you expect. Now, in the case of the response, one of the things that the doGet method ultimately does when it calls the right definition, or actually probably the right dictionary entries method, is that it calls response.getWriter. Now, by default, a mock object will return null for every method. It's like, I don't know how to implement it. Just return null and see what happens. And a lot of times that's fine. But in this case, it's not fine. We don't want to return a null print writer here because then the text dumper will blow up. Instead, what we want to do is we want to return, well, a print writer that, well, we want to return some other print writer, and instead this is going to be a mock print writer. And so what we can do then is we basically mock out all these objects, get all these pretend objects that we've configured to behave the way we want. Then, and the way we do that, sorry, is by mocking the print writer and then say, hey, listen, and this is another piece of magic from the Mockito API. There's this method called when. It says, hey, when response.getWriter, so when the getWriter method on my mock response is called, then return this mock print writer right here. Now, this is crazy magic, and it's put together with reflection. It's kind of cool to learn about, but you don't need to understand the details of it if you understand how to use it. So basically what we're doing here is we're creating these mock objects, we're wiring them all together using this when and then return, and then we're sending it off to the code under test, which is the doGet method. And when we call doGet with that response, that request and this response, we expect the following to happen. We're going to verify that nothing is written to the response's print writer because we have sent a request, because we have a servlet that contains no dictionary entries, and we have asked for, we basically sent it no query parameters on the URL. In that case, nothing should be written. And so we verify that, nope, the print line method, it is never invoked, and that, yes, set status is invoked with SCOK, which is 200, which is exactly the behavior that we expect from the servlet under these in this situation. And so when we run this, oh, I'm still running the debugger. Yeah, sure, go ahead and reload the classes. It passes. Because what we do is we create this mock request, mock response, we configure it all, and then we run it and we do it, and we get the response that we expect. This is a completely different way of unit testing code than you're used to. I'm going to admit that. You're basically, setting up just the environment. So I mean, this is a great example of given when then, right? Given that we have, set up this mock environment, when we call the doGet method with that mock environment, then, okay, here is how the mock environment is interacted with. And this basically, but what this allows you to do, though, is write a true unit test for this. You don't have to run a servlet. You don't have to run a Jetty just so that you can test your servlet. And actually, this has a lot of power because this runs really, really fast. That's pretty wacky. Let's look at another example, and I think it'll help help hit it home. In this second example, we are going to write a unit test for the doPost method. And here we're going to verify that when a post request comes in with a word of test word and definition of test definition, that then the appropriate response is sent back to the servlet, and that the definition is recorded in the dictionary. So we start off and we say, great, here's the test data, word and definition. Then we set up an environment. We're going to say, okay, great, we're going to create one of those mock requests, and when the get parameter method is called with the string word, then return word. Actually, wait a second. That's probably not as clear as it could be. Where's doGet? Yeah, it should be word parameter. I'm going to change that. So it'd be more clear if this was Airline Servlet word parameter, and that is Airline Servlet definition parameter. That's what that's intended to be. So when the word parameter is gotten, then return the string word, similarly for definition. So here we are configuring this mock HTTP servlet request to behave just the way we want. This is basically simulating what would happen if simulating what would happen when I do a real HTTP post, but I can do it here in my unit test because, again, that'll give me something that runs really quickly. I'll also create a mock HTTP response. Here, up here, instead of using a mock print writer, I'm going to use a regular old print writer that prints to a string writer, right? The string writer is a writer that just buffers text up in memory in a string. And I say, great. When the get writer on my response is invoked, then return this print writer. And remember, it's the code inside do post that calls get writer. So it calls get writer on the response, it'll return this print writer right here. But you know what? Do post doesn't care which print writer it is. All it knows is it's got a print writer and it's going to write some stuff to it. So now I'm going to call do post. So and then we're going to do some assertions about what happened. First thing we're going to do is we're going to assert that the text that was written to the string writer via the print writer that was returned by the response contains that message that says, yes, I defined this word as this definition. I'm also going to use, for the sake of demonstrations, another feature of Mockito, something called an argument captor, that allows me to capture the data that was sent to a particular method of a mock object. So I'm going to say so what I want to do here is I want to say, hey, what value was a set status method of the response invoked with? And so the way I can do that is I can create this thing called an argument capture that will capture some integer, and that integer is the thing that was sent to the status method, the integer that was sent to the status method of the response. So I can do that like that. And I want to say, great, I'm going to use assert that, which, by the way, assert that, this is the ham crest, assert that. Assert that the value of the argument captor, so the int there, is equal to OK. And finally, that the get definition method, if I get the definition of the word on the servlet, then I get the definition. And what get definition does, this is a method that is visible only for testing, and this is the thing that will query the dictionary to get me the particular word. So this isn't, this is probably used internally for writing dictionary entries or something like that. Actually, no, it's not even there. It's only used for testing. But this is the thing that lets me validate that yes, I actually wrote, I actually stored the dictionary entry, the entry in the dictionary. Now I run this. Yes. It passes also. Question came in from Susan. What does the then return do exactly? Does it just store the entry? That's an excellent question. And this is something that it takes a lot of getting used to. So these are mock objects. And the mock objects inherit the interface of get servlet response. In this case, we're looking at the response. It says, great, this mock object implements the interface. So you can call a method called getWriter on this mock object, but by default, it's just going to return null. We don't want to return null. We want to return the print writer. So what this does is, and this uses magic here, it basically says, hey, when response.getWriter is called, don't return null, return this value, the print writer. This is the print writer that wraps the string writer. And then we can then use that string writer down here after the do post has been called, to interrogate and make assertions about the contents of the string that was written to that string writer. So what then return does, so the when and then return, and if you read, look at the lecture, there are other variations. You can say then throw or then call original and things like that. What it does is it configures the behavior of the mock object to behave in the way that you want in your test. In this case, the behavior that we want is to return the print writer that wraps that string writer. You're welcome. And just to everybody, this is some truly next level stuff. This mocking, getting used to it is kind of awkward, but I really encourage you to dive into it to figure out, because what it'll allow you to do is it'll allow you to write real unit tests for your servlet. It'll help you develop your servlet so much faster and verify that it works. Otherwise, what you'll have to do is like make a little change to your servlet and then restart your Jetty and go a bunch of back and forth. That just takes a lot longer. So the time that you invest really understanding how to play with the unit tests and get the Mockito stuff working will probably be paid back in double in a faster turnaround of the development of your servlet. Question from Eric, that @visible for testing tag in the airline servlet file is interesting. Is there a reason for that instead of testing it a different way, if that makes sense? It does make sense. It's a great question. So what he's referring to is the get definition method. So here I am on my servlet, and what my servlet does, I guess I really didn't point this out, is that it's got a dictionary that maintains the dictionary, right? The key value pairs, the words and their definitions. And this is the thing that, like when you say, well, the dictionary is like, when we write a definition, we go and we get the value of the word. Actually, this could probably be get definition. That should probably be, that. So we can, when we get the definition there, and when you dump something, you dump the dictionary, and when you add to the dictionary, where's the do post? There, here we go, dictionary.put, right? So that is the underlying data structure. In our unit test, we want to validate when we pass in these parameters that not only does the right output get written and does the right return code get returned, but we also want to make sure that the data is actually stored there. Well, how do we do that? Well, we call this get definition. Well, how do we do that? We have to add a special method. Well, we have to expose this method just for testing, just so that the airline servlet can be tested. Normally, this could be a private method, right? Because no other code calls it. There's no other source code, code in the source directory, that is, that needs to do this. But because the test code does it, we make it visible. We make it default package scope, and then we mark it as @visible for testing, just to let people know, like, you're not really supposed to call this method, but tests do because they need to.
Okay,
Eric,
and
does that help?
and that's different than so I mean, if you did it without that tag and just did regular package private access, the test wouldn't be able to call it?
No, it would actually. So this actually has no semantic meaning. It is just merely documentation.
Got it. Okay.
Yep, that is that's a very good question. So let's see if we dive into this. No, it doesn't have any documentation. Oh wait, download sources. Annotations program element exists or is more widely visible than otherwise necessary, only used in test code. Yeah, and note that it doesn't prevent anybody from using it, and oh, interesting. Yeah. So I mean, you have to be a little careful, but it's still a little breadcrumb to let them say, hey, the reason this isn't private is because there's a test that uses it. So that way, people aren't inclined to either use it in production code or to make it private, because then they'll probably break a test.
Got it. And so it's mostly like it'll show up easier in documentation kind of thing?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
It's purely documentation. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Great question. Thanks. Okay. Time for a break. Let's take another 15-minute break, come back at 8:10. There's one more set of testing that I want to show you. Okay, we're back. So let's see here. Oh, we've done a lot tonight. Focusing on Project 5. We created it. We learned about servlets. We learned about the client. We saw a lot of code, a lot of moving parts, pieces coming together, and there's a lot of magic in this one compared to the other projects. You know, everything from the magic that happens when you have two processes talking to each other, and instead of just invoking a method, you're sending off some HTTP request and then getting the response. And so we just saw a bunch of magic when we were talking about the unit tests for the servlet, which are implemented using that Mockito framework, which again, we create these mock objects. You configure them to do what you want to do. You send them to the code into the test. You send them to your servlet methods, and then you interrogate them, interrogate the mock objects afterwards and say, hey, how were you interacted with? What did the servlet do to you? And is that okay? Is that what we expected? So anyway, lots of good stuff there. The final thing that I want to look at is the integration tests for the code. Now, in the command line projects, the integration tests were running the main method, and the main method was special because the main method can do things like write the standard out and call system.exit. This is the things that we expect the main method to do. And as some of you learned the hard way, when you do something like call system.out or when you call system.exit in a plain old unit test, the VM, we call system.exit, the VM exits. That's exactly what you told it to do. That's not what you intended to do, because in the middle of running one of your tests, the VM exits and the rest of your tests don't get run. And so for that, we use the integration test framework. We use the invoke main test case. And so we did some magic there. Now, one can argue that's probably not too much of a real integration test, because integration tests usually test multiple big components working together, and there's usually a lot of setup and teardown associated with them. Well, here in Project 5, you're going to see something that looks a lot more like a traditional integration test. So in Project 5, when you run the integration test, what we do is, what the project is configured to do is to actually run Jetty, deploy the web application as part of running the integration tests, and then it runs some JUnit tests that make actual calls to the REST API, the real live REST API, which invokes the servlet, just like your unit test does, but doesn't invoke it with mock objects. It invokes it inside Jetty, so it's doing the actual things with the servlet. And then what the tests do is we'll call the actual REST APIs and then interrogate the data that comes back from them to make sure that the right thing happens. And this is an end-to-end test, right? But it requires that you start up Jetty, and so it takes a little while to run. As a matter of fact, let's just go ahead and do that. I'll just run the, if you say Maven W integration test. This is the I don't want to run into the debugger anymore, do I? Oh, maybe I do. No, not tonight, I don't. I do not feel. I guess we'll unset the Maven ops variable. Now we'll run the integration test. It's not going to try to run a debugger. So what it does, it goes back and compiles everything again. We'll run the unit test. That's very nice of it. But very shortly, it'll start running the integration test. Builds the WAR file, generates the Java docs, as one does. Great, this is it starting up Jetty now, and it runs the integration tests. And we can see there are a handful of integration tests, and all of those, there were 11 tests, and they were all successful. But that took several seconds. It really wasn't all that bad. But as you can imagine, as your web application gets more and more complex, it takes longer and longer to start everything up. It takes longer to run the test because these are making network calls. It's much slower, especially in the aggregate, than just having a bunch of method calls inside a unit test. Let's take a look at the unit test. I'm going to run the Jetty here in the background again. Let's take a look at these integration tests. Here in IT, we have 3 of them: Airline REST client, index.html, and project 5. We're going to ignore the index.html. That's basically making sure that the index can be loaded. Here, instead, we're going to look at this Airline REST Airline REST client IT. Now, as you might recall, the Airline REST client This was the code that is used by the main method, by the main program, Project 5, to do things like get all dictionary entries. And again, this is client-side code. So it's the thing that puts together the URL and then reads the response, parses the text out, and returns the map. Similarly, we get definitions of words and all that kind of stuff. Now, this is important logic right here. Now, it might not seem like very much, but A, it's worth testing, and B, when you start implementing this stuff for manipulating airlines, yeah, it's going to get a little bit more interesting, a little bit more complex. Think about testing the search functionality, right? You want to make sure that works, and so how do you do that? It's probably a little bit more involved to implement that and then to return the results. And you're going to want to test all of that. You're going to want to test all of it because, first of all, it's the right thing to do, and you're also going to want to test it because you're required to have 75% test coverage, and that includes your servlet and your client-side code. So you definitely need to have some integration tests. So right off the bat, you might notice some interesting things about this test. Now, this test still uses JUnit. It's got the the JUnit Jupyter at test annotation. It's got some special things though. It has this test method order annotation with method name.class. And what this does is the following. These tests, so usually unit tests are independent and idempotent, meaning that they're self-contained. You can run each test over and over again and there are no side effects. The integration tests, though, by definition have side effects because you're making calls to the server. So even though the unit test begins and ends, it's interacting with the server, it's making changes. So it's doing things like, okay, yeah, create some new entries in the definition. Some new entries in the dictionary. Or, I guess mainly it's changing things that way. But you can imagine for your airline, it's the same thing. I'm creating flights in the airline. I'm creating data there. And some of the tests rely on previous ones. So for instance, the first thing that the test does is that it removes all the dictionary entries. So it cleans out what was ever in there. And so then this is the test that we run first. So we clean that out. And then we start doing our tests, and we want those executed sequentially, just so that we can be sure that we understand the relationship and the dependencies among the various tests. And so when we say that the order of the test method is the method name, it basically means, hey, in alphabetical order, that's why I have test 0, 1, 2, 3. So what each one of these does is that it creates a new airline REST client by calling this new airline REST client method, which basically returns it on the host name and the port. Port is configurable if we really wanted to, and then it does stuff with it. So here again, test 1 calls remove all dictionary entries, and what this thing is it actually goes and calls the delete method on that URL. By the way, this isn't something I've talked about yet, but the servlet does have a do delete. It does have a do delete method, and all it does is dictionary clear. So the first thing it does is it clears out any existing dictionary entries, and then it starts writing some tests. And these tests use the dictionary client just like the main project does. And so then here you say, great, an empty server contains the dictionary entries. And so then we go and we get all the dictionary entries as a map, and we assert that the size is 0. The second one, we define one word. And here we create the client class. We send in the test word and test definition. We call add dictionary entry. Then we call get definition for that word, and we assert that the definition comes back the same. This is doing a round trip test, right? Because the server is running at this point. So the airline airline REST client goes off and calls the server once to add the dictionary entry, and then it calls it again to get the dictionary, get the definition, and then it asserts that it's the one that it expects. Apparently, there is no test 3. I must have removed it at some point. Oh yeah, and here's a good one. Test 4 here tests that an empty word throws an exception. So, and I haven't talked about this yet. So we create the airline client. We say, hey, we're going to, send it an empty string. And when we try to call the add dictionary entry with empty strings, then we expect that a REST exception is thrown. I suppose I didn't really talk about that, so I'm going to mention it now. I think we saw this throw exception if not okay status. This goes off and does the post. And then it says, well, let's look at the response that came back. And if the response isn't an HTTP okay, if it's not a 200, then it's going to throw this REST exception that contains the content of the response and that code. So we saw this in the student class, right? When we were developing that back in like weeks 2 and 3, how this part of this API is throwing an exception, and this is what happens when something bad happens, not bad, something unexpected happens with the REST call. So the whole idea of the REST airline client is that it provides a Java interface around all these HTTP calls. And we don't want the abstractions from the HTTP calls necessarily leak out of this interface. So we don't want, like for instance, we wouldn't want the add to dictionary method to return an int, which is the HTTP code. Now that's leaky. Why does the caller of this code care what the HTTP code is? If something goes wrong, they want a Java expression of what goes wrong, and the way you express things going wrong in Java is with an exception. So that's what you expect. And because we expect it, we have a test for it. And so that's what this says. So it says that, hey, listen, I assert that calling add dictionary with empty strings is going to throw a REST exception. I'm going to capture that REST exception here in this variable, and I'm going to assert that the HTTP status code was precondition failed, which is 412, and that the message that was returned with that failed HTTP call is the missing required parameter. And now when I run all this stuff, they'll go off and interact with the well, that's fast. Interact with the servlet and call all of the servlet code. And so here, and this is really important because what we're doing here is we have this airline REST client, which again forms a sort of intermediary layer between the Project 5 code and the HTTP calls. And it's just like the abstractions of things like Airline or Text Dumper or whatever provide. Sure, you can write all the code in the Project 5 class, but that's too much responsibility all in one class. Instead, we should spread it out, and that allows us to be able to reuse it, allows us to be able to encapsulate it, and allows us to test it separately. So I know that was a lot, but any questions about the Airline REST client? Mm-hmm. Finally, Project 5 IT. Hey, look, it's our old friend invoke main test case, because guess what? There is a command line project. There is a command line program with this project. So let's test it just like we have the other ones. So let's use the invoke main test case. Once again, we have we're executing methods in their named or in order by their name, and so that starts out with this guy, which clears out any of the mappings. Because right now, if we look at what's going on inside the servlet, it has this test stuff in there, and so we need to clear that out. And so that's what that first test does. So it clears out what's there, and I have to wait. Let me just do that, just to show it to you. Hold on. Okay, so clear everything out, and then we start invoking our main method. We invoke our main method with 0 arguments and make sure that we get an error message. We are going to query. We're going to invoke the Project 5 with just the host name and the port, and make sure that yes, we get we get an exit code of 0, but also we want to make sure that it's it contains a dictionary with 0 entries. Test 3 is going to be if you request the definition of a word that doesn't exist yet, it should throw a REST exception. And so the way we do that is right here. Now, you probably wouldn't want your program to do that. You would want it to instead write to standard error. So I should probably change that behavior too, but you all can figure it out. Finally, here we have a test that just adds a dictionary entry, a word and a definition, to the dictionary. Make sure that everything behaves as expected. The exit code is 0. That we have the right output there. And then these could be, I suppose, separate test cases, but it actually goes and then asks for the asks for the definition of that particular word, and it gets all of the entries in the dictionary, because there's only one of them at this point, and asserts that it's formatted as expected. So as you can see, as the program gets more complex and has more parts to it, you have more tests. I mean, it's not so surprising because you wrote tests for your pretty printer, you wrote tests for your text dumper and things like that. But what I'm trying to show here is that there are lots of pieces, parts, and they all should be tested, and they can all be sort of tested in isolation, right? And I guess acknowledge that things like Project 5, because it's like the outside of the system, it's where sort of things begin. It ends up testing a whole bunch of stuff on the back end too. Oh, one other important note: you create a new project in your repository. You should copy over your airline, your flight, your XML dumper, your pretty printer, all that kind of stuff. You just copy those classes over. Don't try to use them from the other project or anything like that. Just copy them in and go from there. I think that's all I want to cover tonight. So let's just take one last look at Project 5. So we have the next phase of our project is a REST API. It's a major evolution in your project. We've gone from writing one program that starts at the beginning of the main method and ends at the bottom of the main method, to instead having this Jetty web container that runs our Airline Web Application, that hosts our Airline Servlet, which handles requests that come in. And they can come in from anywhere. They can come in from a browser. They can come in from a command line tool like Project 5 that goes and calls it. The server doesn't care where it comes from. All it knows that it's got some behavior to provide, which is like, hey, with the airline, the flights, provide all of the ability to create a new flight in an airline, return all of the flights in the airline, do some querying, et cetera, et cetera. And what's interesting is that the protocol between the two, yes, it's HTTP, but the text that's sent back is the XML that the XML representation of the airline is sent back. And the client takes that and does things with it, like pretty prints it out. We looked at the code, and the code has some moving pieces parts, which is the servlet and how it has a do get method and a do put method. We looked at the airline REST client, which is the thing that makes the HTTP queries off to the servlet. And then we looked at the Project 5, which is the main method, which then uses that airline REST client class to do all the heavy lifting. Finally, we also saw how this can be tested, and we saw how we can use the Mockito API to provide these mock pretend objects that you can configure to behave the way you want, and then send them to your test and ensure that they were interacted with in the way that you expect. And then we also saw integration tests that are true integration tests that require that your web application be up and running in Jetty in order to run, and this allows you to exercise the end-to-end functionality of your project. Everything from running the command line to then the intermediate using the airline REST client to then make the calls to the server, which and then handle the response from the server. So that's a lot. You have 3 weeks to do this project, which is usually enough time. I know you're working and focused on your XML. I encourage you to finish that off as soon as possible and then break ground on this project. We'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about it next week. But we're also next week going to be doing our first mob/ensemble programming exercise. So be sure to come back next week for that. And then in 2 weeks, we'll be talking about Android. So we're definitely in the second half of the course. There aren't as many projects, but the projects are much more complex and hopefully much more interesting too. And so then I hope you find it as engaging, if not more engaging than the first half of the class. Questions? Anything about Project 5 that you want to know before we break? Nope. Okay then. Well, have a great week, everybody. I hope to see you all again next week. I expect next week to be way more interactive than this week was. Please stay safe, stay warm, stay healthy, and let me know what I need to know. Hope everybody's doing well, and I'll talk to you over Slack, and I'll see you next week. Bye now.